It started like any other morning show. Bright lights, polished smiles, and a crowd buzzing with anticipation. The producers at The Morning Spotlight, a nationally televised talk show, had booked Elijah Carter, a relatively new name in the world of tech entrepreneurship. At just 34, Elijah had built a multi-million-dollar business focused on empowering underserved communities through innovative software solutions. But to the mainstream media, he was still seen as the young black guy trying to make it in tech, not the visionary changing lives across the country. Backstage, Elijah adjusted the cuffs on his tailored navy suit. Calm, focused, and humble. He wasn't here to show off. He was here to speak truth, to represent more than just himself. He thought of his late grandmother who raised him on the south side of Chicago, always reminding him, "You ain't less than nobody, baby. Walk proud. Speak strong." When the stage manager gave the cue, Elijah walked onto the set to polite applause. The host, Richard Mallory, was a well-known media personality, suave, old school, and known for pushing guests with tough questions. Richard greeted Elijah with a handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome, Elijah." "Carter," Richard began, "you've had quite the rise in the tech world, haven't you?" "Thank you for having me," Elijah replied with calm confidence. "I've been fortunate, but it's really about building solutions for communities that have been overlooked for too long." The conversation began smoothly. Elijah talked about his app that connects job seekers in low-income neighborhoods with skill-building resources and direct-to-employer job offers. He shared how mentorship changed his life and how he's now built a program for inner-city kids to learn coding from age 10. But then the tone shifted. Richard leaned forward with a smirk. "But let's be honest, Elijah. Many people think tech isn't really for people from your background. Do you think you've been successful just because of some diversity initiative or a quota?" There it was, the jab. The room went still. The audience's polite interest turned to stunned silence. The producers behind the cameras looked at each other nervously. Elijah paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wanted to choose his words carefully. Not for himself, but for every young kid watching who needed to know they could rise above bias, and for every adult still battling invisible ceilings. With measured calm, he said, "Richard, with all due respect, success doesn't come from quotas. It comes from work, grit, vision, and persistence. I didn't wait for a handout. I built my company from my bedroom on a laptop that barely worked. I sold my old car to pay for my first prototype. I slept on floors during my first pitch tour. And I hired a team from neighborhoods most investors won't even drive through." The crowd clapped lightly, unsure of where the conversation was headed. But Elijah wasn't done. He leaned in, locking eyes with the host. "You know what's really limiting people from my background? It's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's the narrative, the one that says, 'You're not supposed to be here.' That mindset has crushed more dreams than poverty ever will." The silence turned electric. Richard shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected a rebuttal that sharp, that articulate, that undebatable. "I mentor young entrepreneurs every day who could out-code, out-hustle, and out-innovate some of the biggest names in this game," Elijah continued. "But they get dismissed before they get a chance. They walk into boardrooms and face smirks instead of handshakes. That's not diversity. That's dismissal." The applause grew louder, more sincere. "What I represent isn't just a black entrepreneur making it," Elijah said, standing taller in his chair. "I represent what happens when you stop doubting our brilliance and start investing in it." The show was supposed to go to commercial, But the director motioned to keep rolling. Social media was already lighting up. And Elijah? He wasn't angry. He was precise, focused, powerful. And America was about to witness something unforgettable. After the interview segment ended, there was a kind of buzzing silence in the studio that was impossible to ignore. People weren't rushing to the next scene. No one jumped to break down the set. Crew members just paused. Even the makeup artist standing off stage with a brush in her hand seemed frozen, staring at Elijah as he walked calmly back toward the green room. Backstage, one of the producers approached him. A young black woman in her early 30s. She looked like she was holding back tears. "That was incredible," she said. "You said things that so many of us wish we could say on national television." Elijah gave a soft smile. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I just couldn't let that moment pass. Not today." Little did he know, the moment hadn't just passed, it had exploded. By the time he was out of the studio and walking down the sidewalk with his assistant Maya, his phone was vibrating like a drum line. Twitter was erupting with clips of his clapback. Instagram Reels had already remixed his words with epic music. Hashtags like "Saw Elijah Carter Truth" and "Not Diversity" dismissal were trending. Meanwhile, Richard Mallory was in his dressing room, staring at his reflection. He had been in the game for over 2 decades, and never had a guest dismantle him with such clarity, and without raising his voice. There was no personal attack, no shouting, just facts, painful ones, and they were echoing through every corner of the internet. "Elijah didn't embarrass you," his co-host later told him. "You just weren't ready to hear what he had to say." By the next morning, Elijah's speech had been picked up by every major news outlet. CNN called it a masterclass in poise and purpose. MSNBC did a full feature on his company, CodeRise, and the impact it was having on inner-city youth. Even networks that rarely covered positive stories about black entrepreneurship couldn't ignore the momentum. One of the most powerful moments came when a young girl, 14 from Detroit, posted a TikTok video saying, "I want to be like Elijah Carter. I want to be smart, fearless, and make something big one day. Thank you for showing me I can." Elijah saw the video while eating lunch with Maya at a small diner in Harlem. He paused, put his fork down, and sat back in silence. "Still think you should have just smiled through it?" Maya teased gently. Elijah chuckled. "I never planned to go off script. But sometimes, God hands you the mic and says, 'Speak.'" He looked at her. "Maya, we've been building this company for 5 years, and it's been rough. We've pitched to people who wouldn't even look us in the eye. We've been in rooms full of investors who only saw us as charity cases, not business leaders." She nodded. She had lived it all beside him. "And yet," he continued, "one interview, one real moment, changed everything." And it did. That week, his inbox flooded with partnership offers, not from token-seeking brands, but from people who genuinely believed in his vision. A prominent venture capitalist who once declined his pitch sent an email titled, "Let's Talk Again." Top universities wanted him to speak. Schools across the country reached out, asking to license his company's educational platform. But what surprised Elijah most wasn't the business opportunities. It was the letters. Hundreds of handwritten notes from young men and women across America, many of them black, Latino, or first-generation students, thanking him. They wrote about feeling invisible in school, discouraged from pursuing tech, told to be realistic about their dreams. One letter read, "I saw myself in you. I saw my future in your fire. Elijah took a deep breath after reading that. 1. He'd always believed his work mattered, but now he understood that his voice mattered just as much. Meanwhile, Richard Mallory faced backlash for his comments. Viewers called out his outdated mindset and microaggressions. Some called for his resignation, but interestingly, Elijah never once commented publicly on Richard after the interview. When asked by a journalist if he felt angry, he simply said, "No." That moment wasn't about ego. It was about truth. But Richard wasn't finished. 3 days later, he requested a follow-up interview. He asked Elijah to return to the show. "I want to do this right," he said in a live message posted on his social media. "I want to listen." Elijah was hesitant. He wasn't interested in being anyone's redemption arc. But after speaking with his team, and more importantly, thinking about the young people who watched every move he made, he agreed. "If I go back," he said to Maya, "it's not for him. It's for them." "So," he returned. This time the energy in the studio was different. The crowd was larger. Cameras were everywhere. The interview opened with Richard apologizing, not just for his question, but for the system he had upheld for years. "I see now how subtle the damage can be," he admitted, "and how deeply the narratives we repeat can wound the progress of others. Elijah, thank you for the lesson." Elijah didn't smile for show, but his nod was full of grace. "I believe in growth," he said simply. "Let's make sure we use these platforms to build, not to belittle." And with that, something powerful happened. Not just on that set, not just in Elijah's life, but across the country. People who had never heard of CodeRise were now inspired by its mission. Students applied for its programs in record numbers. Teachers incorporated clips from the interview into their classroom discussions about race, media, and representation. And somewhere in Detroit, that 14-year-old girl began sketching designs for her first tech app. The ripple had begun, and Elijah, he wasn't interested in fame. He had tasted something greater, purpose, magnified. A moment of fire that lit up a movement, not for a day, but for a generation. Months passed since the televised moment that shook the nation, and yet its echo still lingered. Elijah Carter had not only become a household name, he had become a symbol of how dignity, intelligence, and courage could dismantle years of casual dismissal and overlooked brilliance in one calmly spoken moment. But Elijah hadn't let the attention shift his focus. Fame wasn't the goal, and it never had been. His company, CodeRise, expanded rapidly, not just because of his newfound visibility, but because people finally listened to what he had been saying for years. Investors came on board who had once ignored his emails. Schools across America adopted CodeRise's digital curriculum. High schools in underserved communities now had access to coding programs, mentorships, and tech fairs where teenagers could meet software engineers and CEOs who looked like them. Elijah's days grew longer, his schedule packed with meetings, conferences, and speaking engagements. But amidst the whirlwind, he always made time to return home, to the very neighborhood where his journey began. It wasn't a PR move. It was his promise to himself to never forget. One rainy Friday afternoon, he visited his old high school. The building looked the same. Aged bricks, worn steps, graffiti that no janitor seemed to care about anymore. But the library was different. It had been renovated into the Elijah Carter Innovation Lab, complete with donated laptops, 3D printers, and free workshops every weekend. A group of students gathered around him as he walked in, eyes wide, with curiosity. They weren't impressed by the suit or the media buzz. They were curious about the man. The one who had sat in the same metal chairs they sat in now, who had faced the same low expectations, the same labels, the same questions about what someone like him could really accomplish. One boy raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, how did you not give up?" Elijah smiled thoughtfully. "I did want to give up so many times. When I was your age, I thought the system was rigged too deep. I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough, or connected enough, or born into the right zip code." The room was silent. "But one day I realized something," he continued. "The system may be stacked against you, but it's not permanent. And when you know your worth, really know it, you start to see every no as an opportunity to build your own yes. You stop waiting for a seat at the table. You bring your own chair, or build your own damn table." Laughter broke out among the students, but their eyes were serious. They believed him because they could tell he meant every word. After the session, an older janitor walked up to him. "Didn't think I'd see you here again," he said with a grin. "You still got that stubborn fire in you." "I've just learned how to use it better," Elijah replied. "You're giving these kids something we didn't have," the janitor said. "Hope and a blueprint." That night, as Elijah sat in his car staring at the school from the parking lot, he thought about everything that had happened since that interview, the calls, the accolades, the appearances. But nothing compared to that conversation in the lab. Nothing felt as real. Elsewhere in New York, Richard Mallory's career had taken an unexpected turn. After his public apology and a string of introspective interviews, he took a brief hiatus from television. Many believed his days as a top-tier anchor were over. But Richard wasn't done. He began attending diversity training, not the performative, kind, but deep, confronting ones. He worked with media equity consultants. He even visited grassroots tech programs in neighborhoods he once only talked about on camera. When he finally returned to the airwaves, he launched a new segment called Voices Reclaimed, highlighting entrepreneurs, artists, and change-makers from marginalized communities. And in his very first episode back, he invited Elijah on as a co-host, not just as a guest. "You changed me," Richard said during the broadcast. "Not by yelling, not by shaming, but by standing in your truth. That kind of courage is rare. And it made me realize I don't want to be another talking head, I want to listen." Elijah wasn't seeking praise, but he accepted the platform because he knew what it could mean. "I appreciate that," he replied, "but this can't be a one-time thing. If we want real change, we need to normalize these conversations, not make them special episodes." Viewers across the nation were stunned by the transformation. Many were skeptical. Some called it PR damage control, but others saw genuine effort. More importantly, they saw something rare: growth on both sides of the screen. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to expand CodeRise. He launched satellite programs in Kenya, Brazil, and the Philippines, proving that the hunger for opportunity was global. With every step forward, he remained grounded, his eyes always on the mission: to dismantle digital poverty and empower the next generation of thinkers and builders. On the one-year anniversary of the original interview, Elijah was invited to deliver a keynote speech at a major international summit on innovation and equity. World leaders, CEOs, and activists filled the grand auditorium. The room buzzed with anticipation. But when Elijah stepped onto the stage, he didn't begin with numbers or tech jargon. He began with a story. "When I was 12, he said. I saw a computer for the first time in a public library. I didn't know how to use it, but I knew what it felt like to want to. I've been chasing that feeling ever since, not just for me, for all the kids who were told their future was a footnote instead of a headline. The applause was thunderous, but Elijah wasn't finished. We live in a time where voices can rise, where truths can't be hidden in silence anymore. What happened a year ago wasn't a takedown, it was a wake-up, and it's time we stop hitting snooze. By the time he left the stage, people weren't just clapping, they were standing. Some were crying. And across America, classrooms played his speech, families discussed it over dinner, and young kids with big dreams saw a black man in a tailored suit not as an exception, but as a roadmap. Elijah Carter didn't seek to destroy anyone. He sought to rebuild something that had long been denied to people like him, the narrative. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for the system to make room. He created space, planted seeds, and let the world watch them grow. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the most powerful destruction is the one that tears down walls no one thought could fall.